There are so many reptiles in the reptile hobby that maybe are underrated, underappreciated, and really aren't in a lot of collections. But why? And today we're going to tackle why the blue-tongued skink might be the most underrated reptile in the entire hobby, and I'm going to tell you how to take care of them, because you're going to want one after this. I'm Adam, this is Erwin, you're watching Wiccan's Wicked Reptiles. Stick around. Blue-tongued skinks are these heavy-bodied little sausages with these little black or gray or white arms, depending on where they're from. You'll find them from either Indonesia, like Erwin, he's a Indonesian blue-tongued skink, or you'll find them as northerns, which are from Australia, and there's some from New Guinea as well, but you'll always find them on the ground. These guys aren't going to be climbing up tree branches, maybe over a log or two, but these really are maybe the most interesting lizard in my collection to watch, that's for sure. And plus, I mean, that tongue, are you gonna do it? Yeah, there you go. Plus that tongue might be the coolest thing of any reptile in my entire collection. To start off, how big do these things get? Well, this is a unit of a blue-tongued skink. Now, just the big difference between the northerns and the Indonesians. Northerns are going to be more expensive. This is an Indonesian, just because Indonesia will still export their animals where Australia no longer does. So you'll find them more readily. They are very difficult to breed in captivity, which is another reason why they're probably underrated or underutilized or underkept, I guess is the better word. You don't see them at every Reptile Expo table like you do a ball python. But in terms of size, you're going to see them up to 30 inches, and I think Erwin is like 28 or 29 inches. He is a unit of a blue-tongued skink. This is as big as they get most of the time, maybe a little bit fatter, but he is pretty well fed, and this is the size you're going to want to see him at. Now, if you've got a northern or you got your eyes set on a northern, the big difference is the coloration, but in size, northerns are going to have a shorter tail than what you're going to see here with Erwin. Erwin and Indonesians, all of his kind, have a little bit longer tail than a northern will. And another reason they might be a little bit underrated or more difficult to keep, or deemed more difficult to keep, is the size of Enclosure, which is a 75 gallon or larger, in my opinion. People will say 40 breeders, but a 40 breeder is 36 inches long. He's 30 inches long, or right around there, which means he's got less than half a foot on one side. Like, that just doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. What I've got him in is a PVC enclosure, which is 4 feet long, 2 feet deep, and a foot high, which is more than this little potato will ever need, that is for sure. But it gives them a lot of room, right? 8 square feet is, in my opinion, what you want to give them. 75 gallons have a similar type of floor footprint. So that's a perfect size for someone like a blue-tongued skink, someone like Erwin. But in terms of every other reptile, this is no different or no harder to care for than, say, a bearded dragon, which arguably, and we'll get to at the end, I think blue-tongued skinks are easier to care for and better for newer keepers, or in general, just a little bit easier. You're gonna need a water bowl, a food dish, and some hides. That's basically it. I've got some foliage to and fro so that he feels secure between the two hides that he's got, and you can give him more, of course. The substrate, because he is a Indonesian, I use something that holds humidity. We'll get to that in a second, but you could use aspen or paper towel or whatever you want. Naturalistic is always better, and they've got a low chance of impaction in comparison to some other animals that you might find on beginner lists, for example. And on top of that, just something to tell the temperature and the humidity, because you'll need those gauges, you'll need those readings to make sure that these guys have a happy and healthy life. And that's pretty simple. This is the difference between a northern and an Indonesian like Erwin. You'll need a temperature gradient for these guys, so a cool end and a warm end. And that gradient is somewhere between 75 on the cool side, or it can be a little bit warmer, 75 to 82. When I'm saying these numbers, by the way, in the wild, they don't seek a place exactly, right? This isn't an exact thing, it's a care guide. So if you're in between 75 and 82 on the cool side, you're a-okay. And then on the warm side, somewhere in the high 80s or low 90s type thing. Now, northerns like it a little bit cooler, less humid too. We'll get to that in like 2 seconds. But the hot spot, the hottest point, the spot where they can bask and soak up either an overhead heat source or a lower heat source, although I prefer overhead for diurnal animals, he's going to need something around 100 degrees to, or somewhere around there, where northern's about 95. They don't need to be as high as an Indonesian. And humidity. With these guys, that's the tough thing about Indonesians, and that's why I think northerns might be better for newer keepers, and this might be a reason why they're underrated, because people see them as tough to care for because Indonesians, are more prevalent. And they need somewhere around 60 to 80%. Some people say 70 to 85%. I always keep them right around 65, 70 to keep them happy. So yeah, that might be a little bit difficult to do if you don't have a PVC or something that encapsulates that type of humidity. But it's not that difficult with a northern. With a northern, you want somewhere like 40 to 60%, which is really simple, right? Something very similar to like a bearded dragon, a little bit higher than a bearded dragon. So overall, not that difficult to facilitate, right? In terms of their heating and humidity. And then in terms of the lighting, there is a debate, heated debate, if they need UVB. I provide it to Irwin because, it's a desert animal. No, not really a desert animal. These are found in the forest more than anything else, to be honest. What I mean is a basking animal. An animal that is diurnal and will bask to get its temperature up to what it needs to be. Like all other reptiles, it doesn't produce its own body heat. And I know you'll hit me with the exceptions, maybe Argentine black and whites, but in general, reptiles don't produce their own body heat. So I do provide UVB. If you use it, that's up to you. They've lived entire healthy lives without it, but that is something to consider. And that's, I guess, why I would suggest a blue-tongue skink over a bearded dragon. Because if you don't have a UVB light on a bearded dragon, it will not live. Period. That's it. It will have messed up arms. It'll have a messed up skeletal structure. It will not do well. Irwin lived his whole life until he got with me, which, I don't know, it could be 3 years or 5 years. The owner wasn't really sure when he got him, which is... But anyway, he lived a whole life without UVB, and he's a happy, healthy beast of an animal. You are a freaking beast, my friend. Yeah, look at that tongue. And the diet is so simple. We're talking about, if you really wanted to, in a healthy way, and I'm not taking shortcuts here, you could do a premium dog food for these guys, supplemented with greens, things like canned snails. Those are great as well. There's a whole bunch of lists that you can find of edible plants. I mean, don't be feeding it onions or citrus fruits, but online you can find a really great bunch of lists for blue-tongue skinks, and maybe I'll link one down in the description. So that's pretty darn simple. And even as babies, their diet doesn't change all that much. You do want a ratio, which we'll put on the screen here, between fruits, vegetables, and protein. But it's not that difficult to facilitate whatsoever, where, with a bearded dragon, it changes a bunch. This isn't a direct comparison, but just use it as a benchmark because these are underrated in comparison to beardies, which are going to need, mostly, every other day they're going to need crickets, and then as they get older, they need less, and they need more greens. Anyway, these guys are easier, period. Oh, yeah. And because they eat snails in the wild, and the snails we can get in captivity, or the canned ones or the frozen ones, don't have snails, he really likes quail eggs. I love feeding him quail eggs because he crunches down on them. It kind of, I don't know if it mimics really, the shell of a snail, but I think it's cool. And to watch him eat an egg and watch it explode all over his face is kind of cute. And in terms of behavior, this is not my only pet. I got him as an adult, and I've got several other animals that take my time. This was not difficult to do. I literally picked him up. I don't touch this animal sometimes for 3 or 4 days at a time. It is very simple to get these guys acclimated. When they're babies, they'll be flighty and hissy, and sometimes he's hissy if, he's on the warm side and he's fired up in the early afternoon. But today I came down here, he was just chilling on the cool side, which is at, I think, 79 degrees or 78 degrees. And he just let me pick him up. Kind of hissed at me once, and this is, how long's this video been? This is kind of the way he's been the entire time. And watching them walk and go over, like, the hill that I have for him, like, the log, the way that they move, their locomotion is so cool. One thing I will warn you, this big tail that they've got, this giant tail, oh, see? He just did like that little hiss right there. This giant tail that they've got will come off if you are ripping on it, so be careful. It's not just going to come off on a whim like a crested gecko's might. But that's it. Oh, the claws are pretty sharp. Put a rock or a stone in there for him to file his own claws down, because when he gets moving, whew, he will... he'll leave you some scratches. Price and availability, I left this at the end because this is probably why they're underrated and not kept as much. They're kind of expensive. Now, Irwin, it depends where you are, right? In the US, I live, 20 minutes north of the United States in Canada. So I'm pretty in tune with the prices down there, and I've got a bunch of buddies in the trade, in the hobby down there. And they all say the same sort of thing, no matter which part of the country they're from, somewhere around $250 to $400. And then Northern's a little bit more, up to $500 maybe. Once you get into morphs, they're much more rare than they would be in, say, Australia, obviously. That's, you know, where Northerns come from. Those will be in the thousands sometimes. But to get your hands on one, $250 is not hard to find. I got really lucky with him. I think I paid $250 or $300 or something, and I got the Enclosure up here, which is Bob is now in, with them. So I got lucky, but they're kind of pricey. They're not as easy to find as other animals. Availability depends on where you are with these guys, where a leopard gecko you'll find in basically any big chain pet store. And one last note about the underratedness. I think the big thing is captive bred, especially Indos, which can come in to the country or whatever country you're in pretty easily. It's just easier almost to bring them in because it's hard to tell if one's a male or a female. A lot of the times, although there are telltale signs, to be sure you need a blood test to test the DNA on the animal. And the breeding is pretty aggressive. It's really aggressive, actually. So that's why I decided I'm never going to breed Irwin, probably. I love this guy too much. I don't want him to be having his little arms bitten off if I make a mistake and get a female who's actually a male. And to be honest, I mean, Irwin, I call him a boy, but he could be a lady. I don't know. You look pretty handsome. You look pretty handsome now. So there you go. The blue tongue skink may be the most underrated in the entire pet trade, and that's how you take care of them if you decide that you can find one and you want to get one. Did I forget something? Put it in the comments section below. I'd love to hear from you. I did this video because someone asked, why don't more people have blue tongue skinks? Every video idea, I take it to the comment section below. If you haven't already, I'd love it if you hit that subscribe button. And because I do videos twice a week, that means I'll see you on Monday. You're good. You might be the new co-host. I'm serious. Like, if we're doing auditions, you're like, you don't care.